Welcome. This is Triaging Time, and I'm your host, Dan Luna. Today's guest, we have Sean Hansen. Super excited to be here, Sean. And thanks for letting me use your place here in Colorado.
Yeah, of course. Happy to let you do it.
And it's casual hour.
It is casual hour. You just got off an aircraft. I mean, why would we want
Yeah. Rolled off the airplane, everything on a tripod, and we're here.
Yeah.
All right. So Sean is a former Navy EOD officer. Are you an officer?
No, I was enlisted.
Oh man, you're such a smart guy. I was just like, man, he has to be an officer. You are an attorney. I think that's why you have that attorney presence. I'm like, oh man.
Yeah, the stick up my ass presence.
Yeah, we've actually had this conversation a few times. So this goes to my own concussions. 2 combat deployments to Iraq, and my favorite, certified performance coach. And he's helping executives, business owners, and combat veterans identify and overcome the blind spots that are keeping them from achieving a life so amazing that they can't imagine it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because if you don't know, you don't know. And
yeah.
So we'll dive into some of those things. Another thing that besides you being an attorney and a performance coach, learning and development, you've been in and around training for about 15 years. So that's pretty incredible. And I know you have a lot of resources from that. Also born in Berlin, lived in Saudi Arabia for 7 years. And we can go there or not go there.
It was a much kinder pace than when I was in the Middle East for the military. So,
very interesting. And then, of course, and then as an adult, you lived overseas for some time as well. So, thank you for taking the time. And
of course.
I was going to say to be here, but it's your home, so you should be here. Thanks for having me in your home, and of course filming. So, thank you one more time.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Life, leadership, volatility, and trauma. If we only had a few minutes of your time today, what advice would you share with us?
So, for me, having worked with people in the business setting, but then also working with combat veterans, and then my own experiences from my combat deployments where, for instance, the deployment to Fallujah, we lost roughly a third of our guys. And of that roughly 30-ish%, 25% roughly was, killed in action. Mm-hmm. And so having seen trauma in a lot of different capacities and how life can just get so shaken up with some of those experiences, I think for me the biggest thing that I've come across is actually acknowledging your emotions. Because there's so many people, both men and women, that lock themselves into this tight box of performance. They feel that they cannot actually acknowledge the fact that they are feeling, and there's this sort of mental sleight of hand that they go through where they convince themselves that they need to be, for instance in the military, a good operator, or in the business context a great leader. Mm-hmm. And they shut themselves off from tapping into emotion, and so when they do that, they only compound whatever internal issues are going on. And because they've sort of walled themselves off, they really can't begin in the most powerful way possible to inspire the people that are on their teams. Because we're inspired by emotion. We're inspired by a sense of connection. So for me, I think that the single biggest ticket item is, how is it that you find and tap into emotion, and not just anger, which seems to be where a lot of the first responders that I know, and a lot of the military veterans for sure, but also executives, they tend to tap first and foremost into anger to use it as fuel or drive, but then their ability to experience the entire palette or the entire spectrum is compromised. And so they just become sort of one-dimensional or limited.
Sean, I love that. Before we dive into that, if you could just elaborate on an EOD tech, an EOD operator, explosive ordnance disposal. I've spoken to Brad Snyder, so for some of the watchers, they've listened to part of Brad's story. We dove into some other things. And almost before you explain what it is, what I would like to say from a SEAL's perspective, specifically my perspective,
Sure.
There are things that I would face on the battlefield where I would back up, which almost surprises people because you're like, well, you're the SEAL. If you back up, who goes in? It's like, well, nobody. Like, I'm in. I'll tell you what, you know who goes in are the EOD operators. When there's something that, and there's been plenty of times, and God, we had one house, it was a home, basically it was a
home IED?
The home IEDs
Yeah.
were popular in Iraq, and
We might need to clarify that for the audience, possibly.
yeah,
So it's like where they rig up an entire house with explosives, and there's triggers in various entryways and et cetera. But basically the gist is the entire house is rigged to detonate.
So in this one, it was the prayer room that was
Okay.
actually rigged, and there was a false floor. So
Mhm.
there was a piece of the floor, but that's when we back up, and I'm like, hey, whoever our operator is, for if you were working, hey Sean, hey, come check this out. So there's definitely times where we back up, and you're the guys that we call, and I have so much respect for everyone in the EOD community, for what you guys walk up to, what you men and women walk up to.
Yeah.
And you face, and just literally facing multiple unknowns, and you just navigate it. Super impressive, and thank you for everything that you've done for my teammates, and just super impressed with you guys every time.
Oh, thank you. And at least in my book, the respect goes both ways because, again, it's a segregation of roles, segregation of training. I mean, I know that a lot of the training overlaps, but knowing how it is that one person contributes to the overall scenario or the overall team, I think is really, really critical. And I mean, it's somewhat ironic that you say this because most of my experience was with conventional infantry, supply convoy people that would just get blown up and have their asses handed to them like multiple times per week. And whenever I would interact with the grunts, I would say the same thing to them. Like, here you are, no training, no tools, being told, go down there and verify that this is something that we need to call EOD for. And I mean, no way would I sign up for that. And so it's, like I said, I mean, the respect definitely goes back to the SEAL community. Some of my best friends are SEALs. And then also, like, when I would just really working with professionals who are competent at what they do and that don't allow, they can feel fear, but they don't allow it to master them. They understand that there's still a mission or an objective to be achieved, and that they're not just contributing to the objective, they're also contributing to the person next to them, whether that's male or female.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that was really the focal point of a lot of my work. There was one time on my deployment to Fallujah where we were getting shot at while trying to disarm an IED, and we got back to the patrol base that we were stationed out of, and the security guys that were assigned to us, they were like, how do you stay calm in the middle of something so chaotic? And for me, it was never a matter of, oh, I'm so hardcore, I'll tell you when you're older. It was more just, look, we've been called to a specific item that needs to be resolved. And the cordon force that's holding the area at large, and then our little small cluster inside of that space, everybody has to hang out and get shot at and potentially get mortared or rocketed because this thing is here that we need to solve.
Mm-hmm.
And the more frazzled and the more just disjointed that I become, the longer we stay on this scene and the longer that we all get to absorb more and more threat. And so for me, that was really like keeping my mindset and my focus on service and what I was able to provide to these guys. I worked with all men, so that I was able to provide a service that said, okay, we can come in, get rid of the item that we've been called to take care of, and then leave as fast as possible. That was how I was able to stay focused and not just kind of like get so distraught with what was happening, you know, because I mean, it's not easy to focus on an IED while you're also having rounds whiz or crack past you. So that was kind of my focal point, really.
That's insane and amazing, and
Yeah,
all those things. Like I've definitely been shot at a few times, and so just sitting there trying to focus, I can't. That's hard for me to imagine that. So wow, that's incredible. So you went from that Iraq to now a performance coach. So
Yeah.
that's how did that happen? What got you there?
Sure.
And even if I can just keep layering the questions, how have you poured that into some of the work that you're doing?
Yeah. So never make a decision when you're getting blown up and shot at in a JERV in the middle of Iraq. So that was basically how it got started. Was things were getting very political during my last deployment, and we were working with local Al-Qaeda. So not the foreigners that were sort of the true believers, I guess, but I mean, they may have been, but working with locals that eventually decided that fighting with the Americans was better than fighting with Syrians or, you know, some of the other foreign Al-Qaeda elements that were more criminally oriented than true jihadi believers, so to speak. Because I think that's an element that a lot of people don't recognize is there is a notable criminal element to the conflict that goes on in the Middle East. It's not just pure holy war. Right? There's all kinds of other tendrils and sort of riffraff that get, you know, wrapped up in the mix. And so it was during the awakening, and we started working with local militia and sometimes Al-Qaeda, you know, and these were people that we had been fighting against a month prior. And we would go on ops where I was with the grunts, and, you know, we'd, I don't know, be trying to capture somebody or trying to find a weapons cache or whatever, and some of the grunts would recognize some of these quote unquote concerned citizens, and they would say, that guy killed my friend 2 months ago. And I was like, well, I'm sure we killed a lot of their friends, you know, and so, but the political nature that was going on, and just after a while, you know, watching your friends get killed and almost being killed yourself numerous times, it really starts to take a toll on you. And I think that for a lot of folks that are in these kind of high stress communities or high stress cultures, they have this response that's, in my opinion, ultimately unhealthy. I think it's triage to get through the moment, but in the long run, this boxing up or pushing down of some of the stressors that you're feeling because you have to be hardcore, or you should be tougher than this, you should hold yourself together better, that ends up just corroding and eating away at you. And, you know, I remember when I was starting to get out, because of these stresses that I was feeling and the fact that it didn't seem like we were really making any forward movement, one of the buddies that I had, he was like, oh, you're getting out? And I said, yeah. And it's like, well, guess it's not for everybody. And I just, because like my deployment to Fallujah, we lost about a third of our guys, as I said, and it just, I could have punched my friend in the face that day, and I was just
Yeah.
like, yep, I guess it's not for everybody.
Mhm.
But it was, to me, this process of recognizing on some level that something wasn't right anymore, but not knowing what it was. And so I got out of the military, went to law school. Law school didn't feel like a good decision that I had made while getting shot at and blown up.
Mhm.
But I went to, I graduated from law school, became an attorney, passed the bar and all that. Went to work at a company, took over their training department because I had training, learning and development experience from the military. But what really made me transition to coaching was that the tools and the mindsets that I had gained in the military were useful to a point. And the coaching industry is so filled with one-liners. It's like, Marshall Goldberg, I think is his name, or Gold. Anyways, sorry for getting it wrong, but this author and coach, he has a saying that what got you here won't get you there.
Mhm.
And when I was starting to get really serious with my now wife, some of the behaviors that I had were counterproductive to a close, intimate, emotionally connected relationship with her.
Mhm.
And that prompted me to hire my own coach. And I worked with him for a year. And all of a sudden it was just, my view went from this super narrow channel to something that was so much broader. Things that I'd never even thought were possible all of a sudden entered my world. And it was such a powerful experience for me to see that, my life could be totally different. And it's 100% within my power to make it happen.
Mhm.
And so having seen that and capitalizing on the learning and development background that I have, I just, I was like, okay, well, how do I get, deeper into this? And so went through a year-long certification process and started coaching people. And, of course, at first it was sort of like, coach whoever is willing, who's going to date you, like anybody, right? Like, I'll just say yes to whoever comes. But then over time, starting to continue to focus more and more on the demographic that for me holds the most sway, which is leaders of businesses, leaders of, the military, nonprofits, but basically folks that have pyramids of people structurally underneath them,
Mhm.
so that I can create the biggest ripple effect possible, to really truly bring this increased awareness and consciousness to other people so they can feel that magic for themselves.
It's interesting. We were actually talking about this a little bit earlier, as far as you almost have to market two things when you have, as a coach, when you have your own company. You have to market what coaching is,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have to market yourself and kind of your niche as far as what you do in
Yeah.
the coaching realm. Do you mind just teasing out a little bit what's different about a coach? And I know there's different versions of it, but just kind of the version that we both subscribe to.
Yeah, yeah. It's it's such a challenging conversation to have, because so frequently I run into people who call themselves coaches, but they act more like consultants, and they're basically just giving the client the answer. Whereas, as you and I have talked numerous times, the idea that the answers are inside the client, but the question is most definitely not.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's Tony Robbins who likes to say that the quality of your life improves directly with the quality of your questions.
Mm-hmm.
Because better questions lead to better answers, and better answers lead to better results. And so when I work with people, especially when I'm trying to explain what it is that we're going to be doing, it's difficult for them to wrap their minds around the fact that we're going to work together for a year. We're going to talk about all the things that they don't want to talk about with another person. And that frequently does end up happening, where they tell me, I've never said this to anybody, not even my closest family.
Deep things,
Yeah.
taboo things.
Yeah, money, sex, religion, self-worth. I cannot tell you the number of high performers, corporate, military, government, that really deep down have ascended to these massive heights of performance because inside, deep down, they feel like they're not enough. And so they're constantly being whipped by this need to perform, this compulsion to be at the top of the dog pile, because that's the only way that they can validate for at least a short period of time that they're not, worth less.
In that moment in time, get that sense of validation, and just to keep pushing just for that sense of worth. And it goes back to what you were talking about earlier with emotions, like just pushing those emotions down, not really processing those emotions.
Yeah.
And it builds up over time.
Yeah, most certainly. And I think, and that's kind of, given that both you and I tend to do this sort of very intense, deep end of the pool kind of coaching, it starts to border or butt up against therapy. And so then oftentimes people are like, well, are you a therapist? And I'm like, oh, I'm certainly not a therapist. Just make no mistakes about that. But it is a situation where, with a therapist, it's all about understanding the wound. And sort of, I think what you were saying earlier about coaching people from, you can't coach someone from their wound, or at least I don't believe it's possible, because they just spend so much time focused on their wound. And I'm not saying that that's inappropriate. I think where they're at in time, it is appropriate for them to focus on their wound and healing their wound. And that's where a therapist can really, really shine. But then once the wound is healed, or maybe like mostly scabbed over, if we want to think of it in those terms, then it can really be about, okay, this situation occurred in your life. Now, whether it's combat trauma, sexual assault, child abuse, some really deep-seated, long-entrenched, highly traumatic events, they occurred. That is fact. But how you perceive what occurred and how you have allowed those occurrences to continue to influence your perspective on what's possible or not possible in your life, that's a choice. It's like, again, these wonderful one-liners where it's like, we all get wounded, but it's a choice as to whether we want to suffer.
I've had one client where I worked actually with their therapist and myself, and so it was a mutually supporting engagement, and it was great. And we had a conversation, we established some boundaries, and they could take the individual to a point, and then I would almost pick them up from that point and then just move with them and try and continue to move with them on their journey forward. So there's a piece with therapy does a really good job kind of like picking you up, and then you have to take those steps forward, and sometimes that's the power of a coach within that, because that's really the space that we know really well is moving forward.
Yeah.
There. Have you had something similar to that?
Yeah, and it's definitely, I don't think that a client, obviously based on whatever monetary restrictions they have and time restrictions, but sure, bring in consultants, bring in therapists, bring in coaches, because they really, deep down, they cover off on different angles. And the ability to have a therapist work concurrently with a coach is really powerful, because again, as you said, coaching, there's a million and one different kinds of coaches out there. You can get a coach for weight loss, you can get a coach to be more productive and help you with your calendar and effectiveness as far as like task accomplishment. But really, at the end of the day, it's about trying to figure out, what does a truly awesome, amazing life look like? And most of the time, the people that I work with, when they're still in sort of the prospective client phase, and I ask them, okay, well, what would an amazing life look like? What would be so awesome that it would just fill you up? Their answers look pretty much the same as what they have right now, except with a couple tweaks. And getting somebody's mindset to transform to a place where they see a potential that is so drastically improved is hard work. And they're the ones doing the heavy lifting. But it's the coach that's able to pull out patterns and show them to the client, and to be able to say, like, what do you make of this? How is it that this belief structure has held you back? Where has it influenced your decision making in ways that are surreptitious or subconscious, where certain pathways have never even come up for you because in your world they don't even exist. Even though everybody else says, oh yeah, start that business or write that book or do that fitness competition or whatever. And so the coach's job really getting to that place where they can understand the underlying motivations, psychological, emotional, mental motivations, and help the client see where there's a cohesive pattern to then in the long term achieve the goals that they want for themselves. But with that added spice of, now that they understand their own mindset better and where they've limited themselves, let's 10x that life that was the original, like, oh, well, I just kind of want it to be a little bit better. It's like, what does it look like to have it 10x better? And not just more money or more things, because that's definitely not where my coaching focuses. It's not on material possession. It's on relationships, experiences, your own sense of self-worth, your connection to the people that are important to you in your life, your connection to love, your connection to acceptance and gratitude. I mean, things that we all take for granted, and they all, like, we laugh when we say, oh, it belongs on a Hallmark card or on an HR poster somewhere. But really, at the end of the day, when I ask clients what's truly important to them, it's always relationships and experiences. And yet we spend so much of our time spinning around in circles because we don't have the latest Tesla, or we don't have the latest iPhone, or we don't have the respect that we think we deserve for our position.
It's so interesting, is you can't always think your way out of it, or you're not even, and we even have phrased like, oh, that person's in their own world. And so often people are in their own world and they're not challenged on it. So that's something that I've noticed with a coach is just challenging those individuals about their world. Hey, how are you showing up to this? Or what are your thoughts on this? And what's underneath that? And what feelings are connected to those thoughts? And where do those feelings come from? And there's so many layers, and to go down, as we were talking earlier, to excavate it, those underlying issues, to pull it out, and then to start looking at it from different perspectives, and then incorporating modalities throughout the day to literally embody it. We share so much of kind of the same story as far as like having a coach, God, I've had so many powerful mentors that I could never repay enough. I've had coaches in my life that it's been amazing, and it's been that same thing as I've transitioned, and even before that, while I was still at the Naval Academy, and I was trying to find my way, if you will, and just being plugged in with a coach really just started opening my eyes to the environment, not only the observable environment, but the environment inside. And exploring and challenging me with my thoughts, my emotions, my beliefs, even my body, like how I move something, where I held it. For me, I would just hold it right in my heart space. And even now I can kind of feel it, I'll feel certain things coming up, or you can see it with people, or sometimes I'll catch myself like literally swallowing it down so somatically within my body, how things show up. And we walk around in our bodies. We go everywhere we go. This is with us. So what's going on with our bodies? Where does our past live? Where do our emotions live? So it's a great experience, and I know it's been both beneficial personally in both of our lives as we continue to move forward and really just work on ourselves.
Yeah.
I'm kind of speaking for you here just from all the time that we spent together.
Yeah, I mean, so it's really wonderful and fortuitous that you're talking about knowledge, in that at some point every single one of my clients has given me the wave off, where they say, I know, and I and by now it just kind of makes me laugh whenever I get it, because I come back to them and I say, okay, well, you may know, but do you feel? Do you believe? And there's often this disconnect where it's same thing with your body, right? And so many of my clients, I run an assessment on each of them, and all of them peg out to the maximum with one of the questions, which is, feeling the weight of the world on their shoulders. And yet, when I ask them point blank, like, how are things going? What answer do you think they give me?
Great.
Yeah. Yeah, things are awesome.
Never better.
Never better. Good to go if they're in the military. What's another one? All good is a really popular one too. And the times when I'm on a Zoom session or a video session with them, sometimes I can just see the tension in them, and so I'll start to ask, okay, well, what's going on with your body? And quite often they'll give me some superficial, sort of blow off answer that's like, oh, well, I rolled my ankle running, and it's like, okay, well, that's good to know, but what's going on with your shoulders right now?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's the first time that they've realized they've been walking around for 2 days because year end is coming and they have, like, their sales numbers aren't where they need to be, or there's a deployment coming up, or whatever their stressor is. And it's the first time they've realized they've just been holding all their stress in a certain part of their body. And then it creates a window to start to ask, okay, what is that connected to? What are you stressed about? And then they say, oh, well, I'm stressed about this transactional item in my life. I have a year end coming up, right? And I have to justify my lack of sales numbers. And it's like, okay, well, I could see how on one level that's kind of self-evident that you'd be stressed out about that. But then what does that mean? What does that say about you? Well, what do you mean by that? It's like, so you're stressed, you're feeling pressure, you're feeling something that is uncomfortable, that's being triggered by, yes, something in your environment, but that environmental trigger is connected to something meaningful inside of you, whether that's in your heart or whether that's in your head or both. Well, that's something we'll figure out. But guiding people through that discussion so they can understand, oh, my performance is being limited, my happiness or my fulfillment are also being limited by this underlying root message. And getting them to that place where they feel that connection and they're actually able to have a relationship with their body, because especially in this first responder trauma-oriented world, I mean, just think about the number of times in your deployments where you were hurt, whether physically or mentally or emotionally. And think about at the time that we're recording this, the COVID situation is in full swing, and think of all the medical professionals that are watching people suffer, that are feeling pain from watching other people suffer and die in certain situations. And how many times do we just gut it down? That gesture that you made a few moments ago, right, where we just gut it down and we stuff it somewhere. And then what do we think? Do we think it just like dissipates on its own? No, it's going to come out one way or another. And you can either get in front of it and you can, do the work to make sure that you're able to manage yourself and you're able to really tap into your own sense of vulnerability. And by that I mean mortality, like physical vulnerability, but then also emotional vulnerability. And everyone in our society seems to think that vulnerability is some sort of cuss word, where it's like, oh, it's shameful to be vulnerable. But then if you actually take somebody through a discussion about what does it mean to be vulnerable? So like with all of my clients, I set up 2 scenarios. In one scenario, we have a person that builds a fortress They man that fortress with guards. They build a citadel inside the fortress. They round that with guards as well. They enter the citadel by themselves. They lock themselves inside that citadel that's inside the fortress, and they cover themselves in armor. So you have that person as person number one. Person number two never builds the fortress, certainly doesn't build the citadel, doesn't hire any guards, doesn't wear armor, and walks in the wide world exposed to the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, so to speak. Which one of those two is stronger, more courageous? I've yet to hear anybody say the person number one. And yet, so frequently we walk around our lives as person number one. Mm. We don't really connect with what's inside of us. We, like for you, badass SEAL operator. Do I feel fear? Obviously, I know your actual answer would be yes, but like, there's this persona that we have to be tough, and that, the ability to acknowledge fear, the ability to acknowledge hurt, the ability to acknowledge jealousy, any number of emotions, those all go out the window because of the identity and the persona that govern who you're supposed to be. I'm a first responder, I'm an executive, I have to be strong, I have to hold the show together. All these people are depending on me. I mean, so many different types of people out there have that mindset, and so then they don't actually access like in Alcoholics Anonymous, why is the first step acknowledging that you have a problem? Because until you acknowledge that there's something that needs to be handled, your brain is on autopilot. It's like, well, there's nothing to see here. So, going back to the sort of intro question, right, where it's like so many of us hurt ourselves in a more profound and deeper way than we ever think possible by the fact that we don't actually tap into our emotions, into our heart, into really truly connecting with ourselves so that we can then really truly connect with someone else.
And looking at those boundaries. What do boundaries look like? How do they show up for you, in specific locations?
Yeah.
How do they show up for certain family members? How do they show up at work? So maybe it's, and I've kind of, conversations about emotions, there almost tends to be these two extremes. Is like, oh my God, they're so emotional.
Yeah.
Or it's the other end where like, hey, they're a robot. So there's this spectrum. And then there's a time component as well. Well, where are you at? Maybe getting shot at and trying to work on a device. Yeah, you know what? That dial of emotions. Yep, I dial it down. I get as close to just turning it off, turning all feeling off, and I'm just focused on this thing. Totally understandable. And now what's next look like? And so what I've noticed is we just go to that dimmer switch or the light switch and we just turn it off, and then we don't experience it again. And then we just leave it off.
Yeah. And
then it's going to catch up at some point because we keep pushing it down inside, and eventually what's going on in the inside shows up on the outside. So it's now a lot of work that I'm trying to do is the upfront work of, hey, before you go there, hey, let's talk about mindset, let's talk about emotion set. Hey, where do you think your emotion should be in that moment in time? I think they should dial down. Got it. Okay. Yeah. How about afterwards when you're back in your room or you're in a place that's secure? What does it look like then? Afterwards. And then what does it look like before? So what's that prep work look like? So folks in the first responder world, what gets you ready? So there's that physical ready. Hey, I put on my uniform. I grab my tools. I get ready. I put my suit on. Whatever that uniform is, I put my uniform on, and then I start to transition into that next role. Put on that persona, that mask of whatever that is next. And this is how it is. So I almost like break it up in, hey, what's it look like prior to, and then we'll talk about maybe some resilience stuff. And when I say resilience, some self-care, moving to aliveness. People often confuse I've seen this a lot. I see it almost all the time now that I'm looking for it. Resilience is like, oh, they made it through because they're very resilient. Now they persevered,
Right.
or they're gritty, or they're hardy, or that's not resilience. Resilience is the opposite. Resilience is like, I'm relaxing, I'm recharging, I'm out in sun, I'm laying out in the sunlight, I'm working on my tan, I'm on the beach. I'm moving towards aliveness, this feeling of aliveness. And something I like using is if you're a POW and you're in this camp and you're grinding or you're persevering through something, and then there's a moment in time where you visualize, I'm on the golf course. Like, they can take me physically, mentally, I'm on the golf course, and I'm take this moment in time, and now I'm playing golf on my favorite green, and I'm moving through, and I'm savoring each moment of walking on the field, and I'm smelling it, and all the sensations that are associated with it. Like, oh, that sense of aliveness. That is resilience. Moving towards aliveness. It tends to be like a bad form of stoicism. And even what we're talking about, emotions, is like a bad form of stoicism. Like, oh, you're stoic, you're indifferent towards everything. Like, okay, you may think that, and it goes back to what you said. What are you feeling?
Right.
And so now to really align these different, I don't want to dive too deep into some of this stuff, but to look just for an alignment of self, of thoughts, words, and deeds.
Well, so what you said triggered two memories for me, two different snapshots in time. And one was, I watched, during my deployment to Fallujah, I had the misfortune of watching one of my friends and teammates get blown apart by an IED.
Oh, wow.
And when that happened, it felt like something snapped somewhere in my head. And as I was running out there we had another teammate that had been impacted by the blast, and we had to get out there to figure out what the situation was, because we didn't know if he was bleeding out or whatever. But I was so palpably aware that something had broken. And so there is a appropriateness of response. Like, in that moment, it was not time for me to feel hurt or wounded. It was my time to strap it on and get in the game. And the second snapshot that came up for me as you were talking about sort of the appropriateness of action with emotional response, but then also what does it mean to actually be resilient, is fast forward 4 years, and my girlfriend in law school, an amazing person, basically telling me I can't be with you because I can't be in love with someone who's emotionally dead. And ending the relationship. And for me, that was a huge wake-up call, because this is somebody that I thought was amazing on a lot of different levels. And for her to say that, I was just like, I have no idea how to get past this. And I was not resilient. I was rigid. I was hard. I was encased in armor. And armor is great when you're getting shot at. It's not so great when you're trying to build a new life and you're trying to really have a genuine connection. But that second snapshot in time put the first snapshot in time in really stark relief, because it showed me how much I had shut down. And then I was able to see moments on my last combat deployment. There was this time where I was in this huge tent where they had stuck us, like my whole team. Normally we operate as an IED response team, we would operate as sort of like 2 or 3 man teams. But my entire company was in one huge tent. And I remember looking around the tent and basically doing this mental yes or no with each of the faces of the guys, because there were only 2 guys in that company that had been friends of mine before my teammate on the previous deployment was killed, before that thing in my head broke. And I just remember thinking, nope, 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 just kind of going around the tent, recognizing that if those guys got killed, the ones I said no to, that, I mean, sure, I'd be disappointed, I'd be bummed out, whatever superficial words of disappointment you want to slap across that. I would recognize that we would be down 1 rifle, but there would have been no emotional repercussions, no emotional cost whatsoever. And sorry if any of you guys are watching this, but then the 2 guys that had been friends of mine before that, that door closed, so to speak, I was just like, oh man, they had better not get killed on this deployment, because I will not be able to handle it. And that is a really poor strategy, to walk around with, is just hope that it doesn't happen, especially like the areas that we were in. So, I mean, I got lucky. None of us got hurt actually on that deployment, but it just, this issue of resilience and how frequently we hold ourselves back from truly being resilient. For what? I mean, obviously you do a ton of coaching. I have my own opinions based on the experience I've had with my clients, but what have you seen as far as what is that block that is consistent across your clients as to why they continue to hold themselves back from really truly being resilient?
I think emotion has almost like bad marketing, especially, we can get into gender, especially for men.
Yeah.
In our culture, like, what is it to be a man? It's like, oh, you turn this off, and it's a half truth. Yes, there's a moment in time where if it's a dimmer switch, you have to dim it down and maybe go experience some hardships and get through some things. It's weird because just having this conversation, there's a lot of stuff that has almost been settled down for me. That's coming to the surface because of this conversation specifically. And as I'm reflecting back and hearing some of your things, it's like, yep, I dimmed it down. Like, there's the guy bleeding, ripped to shreds, and looked at it, and it was, yep, that's going on, and just looking for HLZ, tracking like, hey, we got the 9 lines going, we have air, where we're going to move them, do we move them, is there a follow-on attack, where's the placement, do we have to move the vehicles? So I'm running through this checklist of things, working with the other teams and coordinating, and there's a guy dying right there. And so I think so much of it is really, it goes to the stories that we tell ourselves of, hey, I have to be this way. And then it goes into the culture. So I think it's multidimensional. It goes into the culture. So, hey, as I showed up, this is what this senior guy does, or this senior person does. So I guess that's what we do. So I'm going to do the same thing. Yeah. So I think so much of it is knowledge. That's why we're sitting here having this, and that's why I started. One of the many reasons why I started Triaging Time was this conversation around this, just to share the knowledge, and then also really to change culture that goes with it as well. Like, hey, there is other stories, there are other options. That is a way to do it. Yeah, I'm not going to tell you what to do because it shows up differently for everyone. However, just know that there's other answers. And so many people are just like, oh, there's another way to do it. Like, yes, you don't have to be miserable. Like, you can still go home and have a good relationship. You don't have to be on your 3rd, 4th, 5th wife, or relationship or partner, to then like, oh, wow, once I left and this can you heal in the same environment that created the wounds? So the complexity starts to build, and we haven't even discussed stuff from childhood. Right. So childhood that rolls into adulthood. So there's so much complexity that goes into it, and you just have, And for me at least, just navigating with that individual, or if I only have a moment in time with an audience or with a group or a team, try and get them as much as I can, as forward as I can with the questions like, hey, what does this look like for you? What is resilience? What is that feeling of alive? Where do you get that? And then how can you transition when you're getting ready for work? And that volatility space, we talk about normal, like, oh, this is my normal workday. Well, there's spikes in that normal activity, whether you're in corporate, you're a first responder, you're in the military, there's spikes there. And for some people, what's the next level? Oh, crisis management. Yeah. Hey, there's a pandemic, we're in a crisis. Okay, so is there nothing in between this huge divide of like, there's normal and then there's crisis? Well, that's a space of volatility. So how can we better navigate that space? Because if we better navigate that space when a crisis hits, we're better prepared to handle that. Not only as an organization or as a team, individually we're better prepared, because when it spikes, that's why we have this pre-trauma, like this pre-trauma coaching that I'm trying to get out there is, hey, if we do this work, if we create habits beforehand, not, hey, after the fact you've experienced this trauma, and now we're going to try and move you to wholeness. Like, that's great. I love it because it's helped guys like both of us move past, because we had terrible habits and we had our stuff that we got to work through and we're still working through. And so as we're working through it, like, hey, I get to help people as I navigate that space. And hey, here's some tools. Actually, hey, midshipman at the Naval Academy, or hey, if you're going through an academy, or if you're going to be a doctor or somebody in the medical field, hey, here's some things that you can start incorporating prior to, so you have some options, both within your mindset, so how you think about going into it, with your emotion set, how you feel about that thing that you're going to go into, and then how are those lined up? There's some other components that I won't dive into right now, but to just look for that, have that plan, that upfront plan, so when it's your first time seeing a dead body, as a doctor, as an EMT, as a paramedic, as a cop, as a firefighter, whatever it is, like, we're all going to experience it as a human being. We're going to experience grief in our lifetime. Somebody we know, and that's a universal for everyone. Everyone is going to experience loss. Everyone is going to experience grief. So how do we choose to go through it? Or are we just conditioned from our environment on how we go through it?
Well, I mean, for me, it brings up this noticeable question about at least U.S. American society. And I think from my exposures to other sort of European countries, I think it exists there as well, but it is especially true in the United States that we segregate ourselves at a societal level from death, as though it's this fantastical thing that happens to everybody, but we never actually see it. We never actually interact with it or engage with it. And so then it's sort of like the boogeyman. It just keeps growing and growing and becoming worse and worse and worse. And, there's that old expression that everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die to get there. And I think that in large part it's because of how we have socialized ourselves to be afraid of death, because we're not seeing our forebears, like our grandparents, when they pass away. We're not seeing them a lot of times. It's just everything's very sterilized, and even if you do have an open casket, for instance, they've been painted up and put in their Sunday best, and it's like this is the physical shell that contained the spirit and the essence of grandma, grandpa, whomever. That physical shell is not them. And that's something that I think in Western culture, I think that we have this very finite way of looking at life. That, oh, well, we're in our bodies, and then, oh my God, we're going to die, and and then what? And I think even for folks that do have a very substantial religious base, spiritual base, I think we still have a narrative that makes it difficult on a cultural level for us to really tap into a sense that there is a continuation. And I have no idea what that looks like. I mean, I don't know if we just turned into beings of light and zip around the universe, or if we go to paradise, or whatever. But I think that there is a real tangible separation between conceptually what we like to believe could happen, and then emotionally or on an instinctive level what we feel comfortable accepting. And this for me, this aspect of identity is so critical, and it applies to the first responders, and it applies to the medical practitioners who are sort of on those front lines, and obviously certainly applies to the military audience, is this notion that we can't let ourselves be something other than we are, because we respond to crisis, and this is what we do, and this is how we do it. And it's like, yeah, I get it, and you can have that, you can play that card, but you don't have to play it in every single corner and facet of your life.
Yeah.
But we just, I think a lot of times people get so accustomed to the contribution. For me, that was the biggest drug that I have ever experienced. The highest high that I have ever felt is the sense of contribution. You and you are alive right now because I just shut that IED down by hand. And I did it with crisis management and bravado and toughness and mental discipline and all these things that I think come with it, or was conditioned to think came with it. And it becomes this cycle where we want to be valuable at such a high level. We want to be indispensable. Like this op wouldn't go down if Dan Luna wasn't present. And on some level we know that's not true, but it's a really powerful drug. This drug of indispensability, and this drug of responding to crisis. And sometimes I think that people in those settings, those situations, they can turn and look at the rest of their life and feel like it's lackluster somehow, because it's not filled with this juice of adrenaline. But the deeper juice is that sense of contribution, where they're like, look what I did. I saved these lives, or I took these lives, which will then in turn save other lives. And I think that's the part where a lot of folks in these communities really harm themselves and their families, is because they don't know how to step back from that, and they don't know how to savor and appreciate the differences that come from different experiences. I know for myself, it's still an ongoing process of appreciating quiet evenings at home with my wife. Because there's still a part of me that's like, you used to be the guy that shut down IEDs by hand if needed. You used to be the guy that would shut IEDs down while you're getting shot at. You used to, fill in all these blanks, and then to just learn to grow to appreciate, but I'm also now the guy that gets to really chill with his wife and be on some mountaintop just watching the breeze blow by, and how amazing is that I get to do that, because there were a lot of times in Iraq where I was really close to not ever being able to get to do that.
Yeah. Man. We're totally over on time.
I know.
This was awesome. Sean, if you could summarize what we covered. One, good luck. And two, I'm super curious how you're going to summarize this. And I'm so glad I get to ask that question and not listen to you summarize it. How would you summarize this conversation? How about this? What are the big highlights that you think?
Yeah. So really, for me, it's about being connected with yourself, with your whole self. not just one facet, not just one label or identity, but understanding that there is a time and a place for you to operate one way, very stoic, very hardcore, but then also recognizing that it takes real work to identify when you slip into a rut where you are just Mr. or Mrs. Hardcore, and recognizing that identifying those complexities and oftentimes competing agendas, internally competing agendas, is the only way that you will have that life that is so amazing that you can't imagine it.
I don't care. We're over time. We're going to keep going. One more question. What advice would you give your younger self? No more than two. No more than two pieces of advice, just for the sake of time.
Yeah. Don't be so prideful. Because I had a lot of pride to the point of arrogance. And it cost me a lot of learning. There were so many things that I could have learned better, quicker, but it was my own pride that kept me from seeing that I needed to learn. So that would be number one. And number two, don't be afraid to be vulnerable, to be truly emotionally connected with yourself and open about what it is that you're feeling so that you can then have that connection with others. Because otherwise, you're that person that builds the fortress and the citadel and puts themselves in armor. You may be surviving, but you're not feeling life. You're not interacting with it. You're just staying locked away in your safe chamber. So you're safe, but you're also then costing yourself this experience.
Yeah. Man, that was great. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share?
I think just generally, I imagine the people that watch your show are high performers. And I'm guessing that if they're anything like my clients, they put a lot of pressure on themselves to, again, be a certain way. And whether it's through books or podcasts or talking to people, hiring somebody, understand how it is that you dig into yourself, confront blind spots, first off find them and then confront them to understand where you're your own worst enemy. And not in the sense of, oh, well, I could have been more productive or more effective or whatever cool buzzword we want to throw in there. But at the end of your days, whether they come soon or they come later, if you think about what you really wished you would have had in your life, and that includes your career, focus on that. And don't just chase respect or title or money because you think it's what you should do. Just really understand what matters to you. And if you don't know, then talk with someone who can help you figure it out. Because this life, I mean, you and I both know this life can be all too short. Even if you get 100 years, it's still all too short. So fucking get after it.
I love it. Get after it. Sean, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for having me in your house and filming you. Appreciate it.
Of course.
Thanks for sharing your story. And,
Yeah.
man, I'm so, I love where you've been and where you're at now and where you're going, and appreciate your support and on my journey as well. So thanks, brother.
Glad to do it.
Wow. Thank you for joining us. If you know someone who can get something out of this, please share this video with them. Of course, like, subscribe, click all the buttons, share all the stuff. I appreciate it. Trying to do some noble stuff here. Remember, you don't manage time, you manage yourself, and leadership starts with you. Yep. Not all the people around you. It starts with you. So, thank you.